Good afternoon, folks. I've had a few questions about how I process my images, and since I've had a tendency to tell people they need to spend more time in the digital darkroom, but they don't need to spend too much time in the digital darkroom, I thought it might be interesting to do a desktop darkroom session. Earlier this week, I went out to Point No Point and did some shooting. It happened to be the first time I'd gone out with my hybrid video setup for months, so I was a little rusty and just wanted to get familiar with it again. I have not yet looked at these images. I'm about to import them in, and we are going to walk through the entire from import to complete, so you can see what I do and how long I spend on a per image basis, and show you some of the techniques I use to get the images to look the way I want them to look. So we're going to fire up Lightroom, and we're going to let Lightroom load in, and we're going to go to import. And what I always do when I am importing images is I will import them into a date stamped folder in my incoming folder. So we go here, create a new folder. New folder is date stamped for the date that I took them. And it was yesterday. Today is the 28th. And I always tag it with the location. On my import, I build my start previews, I build a standard preview. I have an import preset, which I will talk about in a little bit, and I have a metadata preset, which preloads some basic information about the image. If you don't use presets, they are very useful ways of getting all of this. And also, I will typically rename the file to a standard file name, and I will explain why I do it that way once this is imported. So we are starting the import at 11:47 a.m. and I will bring you back when the import is done and all of the rendering and preview setup is set up. And we're back. 72 images in this session, not a huge photography session. It was kind of experimenting and seeing what happened to be out there. As you can see, not all of the images are portfolio worthy, but that wasn't the point. The point was to spend some time working with the gear and maybe getting some good images with it. Rendering time for the previews was about 4 minutes total. It imported in under 1 minute, and I now have standard size previews, which is a good way to get started, and I have smart previews. At some point, if I take a break when I do my processing, somewhere along the way, I'm going to convert these to DNG. I am going to also create one-to-one previews, and I will typically do that at some point when I am going to step away from the computer, but I don't need to do processing. So now that we have these images, I'm going to go into grid mode, and the first thing I'm going to do is attach metadata to them. And I know this is people's most favorite part in the universe, but to be honest, a good set of standardized keywords really makes it easier to work with your images later. So I'm going to select all, and the first thing I'm going to do is go to the map, and I'm going to assign GPS data to them, and I was at Point No Point, so I'm going to just copy these in. I make no attempt to make the GPS accurate to the location of the photo, but to the location of where I was doing the shooting. So it's a good rough thing. If you want to find something, if you like an image, or if you want to go and try to take a picture similar to what I took, I'll get you to the location, then you can walk around and find your own photos. I will not walk you to where I took one. I will then go in and do a little basic keywording. These were taken in Washington. These are taken in Kitsap County. And this area is in Hansville. There. And then I will come down and I will type in a basic title and caption, which is and that's all I do for the first round of editing. For my final images, I will go back and put a little more detail in there. But my goal is not to spend a lot of time on doing this kind of work until it's actually useful. So the next thing I always do is I go through and I do an initial cull and I dink out all of the technically broken images, the flawed images, and I will take a first look and start thinking about what images I might want to keep around and process and which ones I want to store. So for that, we go into the image mode. Here I was pointing at an airplane and trying to figure out where the autofocus button was. You can see how well that worked. I found the autofocus button. This is one of the driftwood statues that they've built at this location. I thought it was a nice thing to take a look at as I was just starting to make sure that things were working on the cameras, because literally I have not used this camera setup since before my move to Washington, and this was my attempt to get back out and get back in the swing of things with it. You will notice there are almost always going to be multiple copies of an image. That's because I shoot in burst mode. Sometimes for bird photography, that's almost critical, but for this other kind of stuff where I'm also doing it as well, it's kind of harmless, and it gives me a chance to maybe tweak an image at one point. As you can see, here's focus dings, so they get X'd out and go away. Once again, I'm practicing my autofocus. This is a red-winged blackbird that is incredibly blurry. Let me turn on there. So you can see that I just don't have the focus on that one. I'm currently shooting at ISO 500. I had the system set up for auto ISO at the start of this session. I turned it off because I just don't feel comfortable using it. I know a lot of people love it, but I'd rather choose my own ISO. So that goes away. He's not sharp. This one, on the other hand, I'm starting to get it. It's okay. I'm still not nailing the focus. The focus is actually more down there, I think. Although, it would help if I looked at it at 100 and not 400. 400%, everything's blurry. I'll leave that one for now. Yeah, I think now... Oh, this is a video I did. This was just testing out this, that I figured out, this is just me starting to do some video capture so I can start working with it. Here is a different blackbird in a different location. And yet another blackbird. He's in flight now. And that actually doesn't look bad, although there's a plant in front of his face. Oh, this is a belted kingfisher, and you can tell I completely nailed the focus on this puppy. So those can go away. And there we are again. Once again, this is a bit of video. Again, I'm just testing things at this point. And there is, that's not bad. That'll sharpen up nicely. One of the reasons you do burst mode here is that you sometimes get a little shutter shake on the first image or so, and in your burst mode that will work itself out in subsequent images, and I think that's actually not a bad starting point for that bird. Here is a slightly different view of him, her. Actually, that's a female, I believe. With the banding, yeah, I believe that's a female. The banding on the chest, and a ding, and the autofocus kicks back in, and a ding. I was experimenting with different autofocus modes here for what it's worth. That's a photo I'm probably going to process. Yeah, it's a photo I'm going to process. I wish that stick wasn't behind him, her, but what the heck. And then another video. And then a couple of final shots. This is a marbled murrelet out in the water. And that's where a marbled murrelet used to be before it dove while I was trying to take its picture. So I'm going to ding those out. And so we're at noon, so we're right at 12 o'clock, and I have finished my first edit and call, and I'm going to delete the rejected photos, and they go away forever. And I'm now down from 72 to 42. That's a pretty low keeper rate for me. But this, as I said, was kind of a let's just point cameras at things and try stuff. So the next step for me is always to go in and do a second cull, but this one I will keep the images that I cull and review them again in 2 to 3 months to see whether there's one that catches my eye that maybe I missed in the heat of new photo. So this is I'm now shifting from culling for removal to culling for archiving. And for this one, they're all about the same, so I will pick one. I will pick arbitrarily that one. And for this guy, I will pick that one. For this one, I'm going to pick that one. Although he's got his mouth open there. She's got her mouth open there. I'll pick that one. I like to get interesting and unique behaviors. I try to minimize, and then I want that one. And then I'll keep those two. So what I'm going to do now are the ones that are not flagged. I will go into grid mode. I will collect. I will exclude the videos because I'm going to I'm not going to deal with them in this video, but I don't want to archive them. Actually, what I think I will do. Do I have them all? Yeah, I think there's one more. I think what I will do in this case is let me unselect that and let me go into the search area, and I will go for file type video, and I will move them to their own folder. 0527.no point videos. And that way I don't have to worry about them for the purposes of this. And go back to, I should note, you'll notice I've got a number of predefined search forms. I should note that when I rate images, Images that I am going to use are 3 stars or above. 3 stars are my spear carriers. They're the perfectly good usable images. 4 stars are images that I'm going to take some extra care in processing, and 5 stars are my portfolio quality images. If I'm going to archive an image, and you'll see this in a second, I will rate it 2 stars. And it goes off into a retirement area where I will go back and review those after a while. And then if I don't, on a second review, if I don't activate them and make them 3 stars or better, I delete them. I know there are people who keep everything. I am not one of those people. 1 star special images, and you'll see this come into place later. My 1 star images are things that are part of some other image set that I need to or want to keep around, but are not the actual image that I'm going to use or publish if I'm going to do something with the image. For instance, down the road you will see that I'm going to take my processed images, I am going to run them through a sharpening tool and a denoising tool, and coming out the other end will be a TIFF, and the TIFF will be rated 3, 4, or 5 images. The DNG original, or in this case, since I haven't converted yet, the RAF, the raw original, will be the 1 star, and they will be combined as a set within the folder. And that way I can always go back and start from scratch, but it's always obvious which image is the image. If I'm going to use a specific image, which one is the one I should use, and use export or print. So I'm going to go and pick the ones that I have not flagged, and I'm going to select them, and I'm going to go 2 stars. And I have a special folder down here called Retired 2 Stars, and I'm going to create a folder in there. And that is, once again, date stamped. And I move those images out of the way. And that's done. So it is currently 12:06 by my watch, and I have taken the 72 images I imported at 11:47, and in about 20 minutes I'm down to my 7 keepers. And the other ones are there for me to look at again later if I choose to. But they're not going to get in the way, and I can focus on processing these. And what I'm going to do, I think for now, I will note that it is often the case that when I go through this third round, this is now my editing round where I start actually processing the images, and I am pretty sure that I'm going to decide that this one is not gonna survive, but I wanted to take a look at it when I clean it up. One of the nice things of having a fairly high megapixel camera is I can crop with abandon. And so I've cropped this. Maybe I'll keep it. We'll see. I'm on the fence there. Anyway, let's go to one of the Kingfisher fit, and let's process that. I don't think this is an amazing picture, but I think it's a good solid ID picture. I can use it for blog posts about the location. I can use it for various things. It's not something that's going to get put in a portfolio. If you hear the screaming in the background, that's my cockatoo. And she is an absolute joy, and I might kill her someday, but that's just part of her joy. So let's start with the basic editing. First thing I will typically do is I will do a crop. I may change this at some point because I've been starting to think a little bit differently. But I typically crop either to 4:5 or 16:9, depending on the topic. I don't use any other crops right now unless I'm actually taking a processed photo and recropping it for a specific purpose. But for my general day-to-day, I keep the cropping and the aspect ratios pretty standardized, because that way I know that I can use them and I don't have to worry about eating too many pixels if I recrop. You can see I'm cutting this down so that the short end is around 2500 pixels. I won't process an image unless I can get one that has at least 22 to 2300 pixels on the short side anymore. And as I work through my older images, I am culling and retiring the ones that don't meet that standard when I run across them. Mostly. There are special images that I'm keeping around anyway, because there are a lot of things you can do to take advantage of it. But in general, this is what I'm looking for. So this is where we are going to start. And here is a typical edit for a typical photo like this. She's pretty sharp. The background is pretty blurred. So let's go into develop mode. I have already cropped it. We're going to start with the basic. If you look at the histogram, the first thing I'm going to do is set my white point and my black point, which helps set the contrast for the image. And I'm trying not to clip anything. I will be readjusting that later. So that sets my initial black point. Next thing I do is, you'll note I have stopped using the contrast slider completely, and I sometimes touch vibrance, but for the most part I'm doing my contrast adjustment with the dehaze tool, because I really like how it helps improve and increase the contrast, but also tends to help pop the image from the background. So you can see that the background darkened out and the bird pretty much stayed the same, although it did get a little blacker, and I did start doing a little clipping, so I'm going to pull that back, and so I'm not clipping again. But by using that as kind of it is a lot like what the clarity tool does, but I think it does a more interesting and better job of it. I will still also go in and add a little clarity, and I will go in and add some texture. If you look at the bird's now sharpened up a fair bit thanks to the dehaze. There's a little better detail in it, and that will get even better. Now the next thing I will do in a case like this is I will go down to the HSL area, and I'm going to hit the luminous tool, and I'm going to hook it to the background greens, and I'm going to darken them out. And then I'm going to go and I'm going to cut their saturation, because what I want that to do, what that does is that reduces the intensity of those images, and as long as those colors are not part of the bird itself, you can kind of make the background disappear and lose prominence, so it's not competing with the bird anymore. So you can, and the whole goal there is that it doesn't exactly cool off the background, but in some ways it effectively does, especially when you're talking about foliage like this. You're pulling the yellow out of the image, and I think that tends to make that a little cooler. It allows the image, the bird itself, to be a little warmer, and so there's a little bit of depth between the bird and the background. We can now go back, and I think I'm going to raise the exposure a little bit, which will... It's not specifically goal of mine, but in a case like this, what I kind of want the look to look like, that I have put a big floodlight on the bird, and the bird is well lit, and everything around and behind it is kind of darker and dimmer, so that it doesn't compete with the bird for your attention. I'm also going to... The white balance on this looks pretty good, but I know that this ought to be a pure white, so if we look at it, that actually warms it up a little bit. think maybe I will back that off a bit. And there we go. And then I will typically put a small vignette on this thing, usually around 10 to 12, very little more, not rarely more than that, because I don't want the vignette to show up either in the image or in the thumbnail. But what I've done is I've now taken the edges here and I've sort of dimmed them a little bit more, which once again pushes the bright light and the area of attention here to the middle of the image. You can do a lot more of that, but then it starts looking really rather silly. One thing I might try to do in some cases, since this area up in this corner is a little brighter, you could do a graduated tool, a linear grad, and just bring that out and then drop the exposure just a little to once again dim it out. You could even maybe drop the highlights a little bit, and you could even drop the saturation a little bit, but I don't think I need to. You could potentially even do the same here to kind of, this would be a place where it might almost make sense to blur out, use the dehaze tool in the other direction. Use the clarity tool to drop a little the clarity, maybe drop the saturation a bit. But I don't think it really helps. Having done that to this image, I can now sync that to the other two images and include the masks. And then for these other two images, all I'm going to really do is I'm going to look at the crop. And I think maybe I'll make this a vertical. When you do the vertical, of course, and then since the camera moved a little bit here, I'm going to recenter it in the crop. Sometimes I will do something like this and move it a little towards one of the rule of thirds. But you can also see that I've got some clipping. So let's adjust the black point, and I think I'm gonna raise the exposure a little bit too. I think that'll do it. Now at the marbled murrelet, once again, we are looking at a way out in the middle of nowhere bird. So we're not gonna necessarily get a super close up, but let's see what happens when we try to move a crop in on it. I'm not sure. I'm not going to bother processing these. It's a little too far out. So let's go back to the Blackbird. Let's adjust the crop a little bit. Move it a little up towards a third so that it looks like it's flying through the frame and not centered in it. I'm going to note here that I use an import preset, and the import preset does a few things for me. The one that you will notice is that the highlights are set to -100 and the shadows are set to +100. I can actually take the preset off and show you this is how it looked coming out of the camera. And then here's the import preset again, and you can see it's doing a few things. But the big thing is that the highlights and shadows get kicked in like that. That is a technique I learned from Art Wolf. And when I took his Olympic National Park photo workshop in 2019, I was kind of amazed at watching him do this to images and how he could consistently get interesting results out of it. Now, if you do some searching around the internet, you will also find people who will talk very loudly about how this technique basically breaks your image. So your mileage may well vary, but I have found that it works for me basically all the time. And it really helps me manage the dynamic range of the image, especially when trying to work with shadows, especially with things like black birds. So I use it basically on everything now. Sometimes I might tweak it a little bit, but very rarely. I think it's an interesting technique for you to explore and see what you think. If you don't like it, then don't use it. And once again, we are going to work on the black point. We are going to work on the white point, and that really brings up the image and makes it a lot less flat. And then I'm not going to use a lot of dehaze because with the blackbird, you're asking for trouble. But I think the dehaze works better than the contrast slider does. Once again, we're going to do that. Now, obviously, a big problem here is that the foliage is just kicking the bird's butt in terms of drawing attention. So this is where this technique of trying to tone it down, to darken it, to desaturate it, and that's how I like my foliage to look. I'm not a huge fan of a lot of yellow in the foliage. I want it to be kind of a purer green than the sensors will show. Am I cheating? I don't think so. Cheating is in the eye of the beholder. Once again, I've done some clipping, so let's raise the white point a little bit. And now, if you look at the histogram, it's a little on the darker side, so I can brighten that up again. And now I think the bird is much better balanced within the foliage. The foliage is still kind of bright and green, and it should be, but it's not like sucking the eye through with intense. You can do some of what I just did using the HL sliders with vibrance. However, vibrance is actually kind of a global thing, and you can see it affects the bird as well. And I'm trying to minimize that, although I might go about there, and I might actually do a little more clarity. And so that image, I'm going to put a vignette on. And we're going to go to the next one. And here, once again, I'm going to put the 4x5 on it. And I'm going to crop in to get rid of that little bit of fence. And I'm going to do that. And if I had my act together, I wouldn't have shot the fence into the frame anyway. But I am not one of those people who thinks that cropping images is evil. So I do it. And we're going to set the white point, and we're going to set the black point. And I'm now going to use dehaze to adjust the contrast of the image. And I think that looks good, and I think that I can raise the exposure a little bit. And let's give it some texture and some clarity. I'm tempted to leave this alone, but I don't think I need to drop the luminance, but I'm going to desaturate that a little bit. I like my images I like the foliage of my image to be a little desaturated compared to the subject, because I think it helps the subject pop. And I think that's all that really needs. So once again, I'm going to throw in a bit of a vignette. Not a lot, but right around there. Once again, that just kind of pushes the eye to the center of the image so you see that. And so we are now at 1224, and all of the images have been processed. I'm going to take a quick break. We're 32 minutes into the recording, and I'm basically done with that session. And we're back. I took a minute or so that I could make some notes on what I've been doing and put some timestamps down for later. Otherwise, I have not touched anything here. So now that we are done with the processing, I'm going to take the two images that I decided I'm not going to use, and they go into the retired folder, and I will move them. I need to move those. They go in here. And now I can close up that. And so we, in half an hour, have gone from 72 images on the camera to 5 images that have been processed but are not quite complete. So the next step for me is to update the metadata, since these are the images I'm planning on keeping. And I still keep it pretty simple overall. I will add in the species, and then I will go down and I will change the caption and the title to be the species as well. And if you look at what I've done with my keywording, if I bring up the edit for that, you'll see that in the synonyms I also have the Latin names, so that when I attach the belted kingfisher name to it, I also attach the Latin name to it in one stroke. And if you aren't playing with your keywords like this, you should. I have over time built a very strong library of all of the species that I have photographed and seen, and all of them are like this, so that I don't have to go and figure out what it is, what to add to it. It's all in here. And this is where putting a little time up front into your metadata saves you a lot of time and hassle later. So anyway, those are done. This is a red-winged blackbird. And I copy that, and then I will come down here and I will put that in the title, and I will put that in the caption, and this is going to just remain point no point because it's a picture about the location, and it's the sort of thing I will use when I get around to writing a blog post or an article of some sort about point no point, and I will have things like that that I can use. None of these are great shots. They're all going to be 3-star shots. My metadata is now complete. That took me about 2 minutes. Coming up with a standardized metadata plan like this, I think is really helpful. And once you sort it out, and you'll have to do some upfront work, it really speeds the process here. And if you look at what's included in here, you'll see that creator, copyright, and some of the other data here has all been included. If I bring up the excess of the IPTC, you'll see the GPS info, the artist info. My import preset loads in all the contact info and loads in the copyright info, and it's pointing to my old website. I'll have to fix that. Oops. Anyway. So we're now done. You know, that took me, what, a couple of minutes. The next step is to process this through the sharpening tool. You'll notice that I did not do any sharpening or any noise reduction within Lightroom. I am now exclusively using the Topaz Labs tools, and I think that they are pretty amazing. The way I do that is you go into Edit In, and you pick the Sharpen AI tool, and you're now making a TIFF of each image to do the processing, because it will not process the RAWs. You'll notice I'm using the Color Space Pro Photo, which maximizes the color space compared to like RGB or Adobe RGB. I like using Pro Photo for these kind of things. And I will now hit Edit. And it will create copies, and it will add them to sets with the originals. And the Sharpen AI comes up, and I have found very rarely do I ever adjust off of their automatic defaults. So I will select all of the images, and yes, it sometimes like nannies me and points out that stuff is blurry, but it does a really nice job of sharpening. I don't know how well that will show up in the video, but I will, when I do the blog post on this, include before and afters for all of these. So they are now done. I am now going to select those images again and right click, and I'm going to do click in and do the Topaz Denoise, and I'm going to choose Edit Original. And once again, I'm going to select all. I'm going to apply. And we are done. So processing is now complete. I have 10 images, the originals, and I've got the final process TIFFs. What I will do now is I will go into the search, and I will go to File Type, and I will pick the raw images, and I will hit them with 1 star. I will hit the TIFF images, and I will hit that with 3 stars, and I will exit the filter. And we can now look at all of these images. Let me move this to 200. And this is the sharpened and denoised version of the image. And this is before sharpening. That is post-sharpening and denoising. Before sharpening, post-sharpening. And there's a very significant, and this Topaz Lab Sharpen AI does a way better sharpening setup result than I have ever been able to do myself. This has been one of my kryptonites. There's that blackbird again. And there it is sharpened. I mean, it's still not an amazing image, but you can, I think you'll see in the video how much better that is. And remember, we're looking at this at 200%. You look at this at 100%, and you can still see the improvement. The eye that's sitting there right to the right of the plant that's covering its beak is much better. And then here is an unsharpened version of the belted kingfisher, and here is the belted kingfisher sharpened. And I think if I take this to 200, one of the first things I notice is the little white stripe under the eye and the little dot on the beak here and the nays. I as much improved. And there aren't any real sharpening halos or artifacts. And then the background is crisp and clean. The denoiser does a great job, although these weren't terribly noisy images to start with. So, and we're done. I took clock time about 50 minutes. Some summary thoughts on this. I will do a blog post to go with the video. It will include copies of these images at 100% that you'll be able to download and or look at if you want to compare the before and after. But as you can see, I only spent like 2 or 3 minutes per image on my basic processing. Most images don't need more than that in modern digital darkroom tools. The ones that do, I will go in and I will do more on. If I cared more about this image, if I thought it was a better image, one of the things I might do, for instance, is come into the eye and do a radial gradient here and give it just a hint of an exposure boost so that the eye stands out a little bit more. Not enough that you're going to actually see it, but enough that it kind of makes the eye more of a focal point. That can be especially critical on a black bird with black eyes. It can also be a real pain point because it's really easy to make it look like a demon bird without realizing it. The rest, I think overall, this was a pretty overcast day with kind of softbox flat lighting. There aren't a lot of shadows. Where I will get into gradients is where I'm trying to deal with harsh shadows. And there's a lot you can do these days with modern tools. But I don't really need to on any of these. Now, I don't think these are not going to be portfolio box quality images, but I think they're perfectly good and usable, and they kind of show off some of the things I do. And I think the point I want to make is you don't have to put a lot of time and energy into your keywords if you build some structure into your process to understand how to do it quickly and in ways that will work for you down the road. And the same with the basic processing. Most of my images, I'm adjusting the white and the black point, I'm adjusting the contrast with dehaze, I'm maybe playing with the background with the HSL, and I'm doing a vignette, and I can crank out an image in a couple of minutes. Tricky ones take longer, but if you're talking about just day-to-day kind of digital darkrooming stuff, that's all you really need. And hopefully this video gives you some ideas on how you can speed up your processing and make it more consistent and better. And I'm curious what you think, and I'm curious to hear what comments you have on this. So have a good day, and we will talk to you later.